find a good place to stand where I can see everyone. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
We are on the threshold of Exodus, on the very edge of leaving Egypt, of moving off into, well, what's going to be a little bit of a delay, but eventually the promised land, the land of Israel. And there is a debate, because there's always a debate in Judaism, about whether or not we deserved the Exodus. Not whether or not we deserved to be free. Of course, everybody deserves to be free and to be out of the slavery such as was done in Egypt. But the question of whether or not we had any merit to warrant the additional blessings and miracles that were performed on our behalf by God. The first opinion says, no, actually, we did not deserve it. It was lucky for us, if you will. In fact, it imagines a debate where Moses was standing there at the burning bush and saying to God, you know, God, the last time I was in Egypt 40 years ago, the Israelites themselves ratted me out and refused to let me even try to help them to stop arguing with each other. These are not nice people. These are, well, what the Yiddish would eventually call chutzpahdik people. And maybe you should pick someone else, God. Maybe they're not worthy of all the blessings you want to give them. Indeed, we know that even when Moses went back and told them that redemption was at hand, at first they rejected it. At first they criticized, saying that you've only made things worse. And even when we had seen the miracles and left the land of Egypt, we still grumbled and complained throughout our journey through the wilderness of Sinai. It would seem that we were not very meritorious. But God had a counter-argument. God always does. And he said to Moses, no, you don't understand, Moses. I'm not taking them out because they are worthy now. I'm taking them out because they will be. One of the advantages of being God and existing outside time and space is that God could see all of history unfolded at once. And God knew that eventually the Israelites would be so much more than they currently were. Eventually taken from Egypt, brought to Mount Sinai, given the Torah, and guided throughout the next centuries, they would rise and become a people with an amazing contribution to make to the world and for their own souls. And it was for the future merit that God was redeeming them at that time. But there is another voice in Jewish tradition which says, no, actually the Israelites were deserving. Now, it is true that we were querulous. It is true that we were not always nice. It is true that we often behaved very badly. It's true that we still do. But during those years of enslavement and bitterness in the land of Egypt, we did maintain something of our sense of peoplehood. We maintained our language, we maintained our mode of dress, and we maintained the names that were passed down to us from the tribes that had come before us, those that had first entered the land of Egypt. Everything else had been scrubbed clean by either the harshness of the Egyptian slavery or by the temptation of Egyptian culture and the glamour of their gods and everything else along the Nile. But our names, our clothes, our language, we held on to. And that was enough, says this voice in our tradition, that we warranted to be redeemed. Because there was still a there. There were still within each of us what is now in Yiddish called the Pintel Yid, that spark of Jewish life, that was still being maintained with a remembrance of the past, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, remembering their ancestors who had come, remembering all of the tribes, remembering that there was a promise, that there was a hope for something better. And even if everything else had fallen by the wayside, their allegiance, their dedication to that, and their connection to each other, that was enough. That was enough for God to work with. That was enough to merit being brought out. Now, as they say, you put two Jews together and you get three opinions. There is a third way, a way to reconcile both of these, to say that both opinions are actually speaking about the same thing. That the only reason that there was a future in which we could find the merit through the gift of Torah was because we had held on to our past, to our legacy that we were holding on, that we had carried from the time of Abraham, Isaac, and the others. That by looking back, we were able to have a future. That by holding on to what we were being given, we were able to pass it forward. That this is the true miracle that allowed us to escape one of the worst situations that any nation could ever be in, by being able to hold on to that treasure and to recognize it as treasure, and to then pass it to our next generation, allowed us to not only have a blessing, but to be a blessing as well.